At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, a P-38 Lightning roared down a dirt airstrip cut into the jungle of New Guinea. The morning air was already heavy with heat, fuel fumes, and dust kicked up by the twin engines. Crouched beneath the left wing was Technical Sergeant James McKenna. He had been maintaining P-38s in the Pacific for 8 months, long enough to know that this aircraft and this mission carried a familiar risk. The pilot climbing into the cockpit was Lieutenant Robert Hayes. He was 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa, and this was his 7th combat mission. He had 0 kills. That statistic mattered. Not because Hayes was inexperienced, but because pilots with no kills tended not to survive very long. The Japanese had sent 18 Mitsubishi Zero fighters to intercept the morning patrol. Hayes would be flying directly into them. McKenna watched Hayes taxi out and take off, watched the P-38 climb and disappear into the pale morning sky. He had watched dozens of pilots do the same thing. Some came back, many did not. The P-38 Lightning was supposed to be one of America's best fighters. It was fast, heavily armed, and deadly at high altitude. Twin engines meant it could absorb damage and still get home. In straight-line speed, it outclassed the Japanese Zero. But there was one problem. The P-38 could not turn with a Zero. Every American pilot knew this. Training manuals drilled it into them. Briefings repeated it before every mission. Never turn with a Zero. Use altitude. Use speed. Dive, fire, and climb away. Hit-and-run tactics only. The problem was that real combat did not follow manuals. Japanese pilots learned to bait American fighters. They drew P-38s into turning engagements where speed and altitude advantages disappeared. Once the Zero got inside the turning radius, escape was almost impossible. In the previous 6 weeks alone, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s. Most of those pilots were killed after being caught in turning fights they could not escape. Official reports blamed pilot error. McKenna didn't believe that for a second. He had worked on nearly every one of those aircraft. He knew the pilots. Some were barely more than kids. Others were experienced flight leaders with confirmed kills. They all described the same thing before they died. A delay, a hesitation, a feeling that the aircraft did not respond immediately when they moved the stick. McKenna knew exactly where that feeling came from. Inside the P-38's twin booms ran the aileron control cables. They stretched through pulleys to the tail and back to the wings. On paper, the system was perfect. Cable tension was within factory specifications. Every inspection passed. But there was slack, only about 3/8 of an inch. At high speed, it didn't matter. But in low speed, high G turning fights, that fraction of a second between pilot input and aircraft response meant the difference between rolling inside a Zero's turn and being shot down. Pilots didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. They just said the controls felt mushy, slow, like the airplane was fighting them. McKenna felt it every time he worked on the cables. He could hear it when he plucked them during maintenance. Loose cables sounded different from tight ones, even when both were technically within spec. He mentioned it to the engineering officer. The response was immediate and final. The cables were within tolerance. Modifying flight controls without authorization was forbidden. Engineering approval would have to come from Lockheed in California, 7,000 miles away. That approval was never coming. Meanwhile, pilots kept dying. McKenna remembered Lieutenant David Chen. Chen survived one fight only because his wingman shot a Zero off his tail. 3 weeks later, Chen was killed flying another P-38. Same story. Couldn't roll out fast enough. Then there was Captain William Morrison. 11 kills. Experienced. Smart. On August 3rd, Morrison tried to roll inverted and escape. His last radio call described mushy controls. He died at 4,000 feet. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. He watched them walk to their aircraft, watched them take off, watched the empty revetments afterward. The training manual said the problem was pilot discipline. McKenna knew the truth. The problem wasn't the pilots. It was the airplane. On the evening of August 16th, Lieutenant Hayes came to the maintenance area. He didn't ask casually. He asked desperately. He wanted to know if McKenna could make the airplane roll faster, anything at all. He said he didn't care about regulations. He just wanted a chance. McKenna told him to come back in the morning. That night, McKenna stayed behind in the hangar after everyone else had gone to sleep. The only sounds were generators and insects buzzing against the lights. He opened an inspection panel inside Hayes's P-38 and grabbed the aileron cable. He felt the slack. Then he reached into his tool bag and pulled out a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire he had salvaged from a wrecked aircraft weeks earlier. He bent it into a Z shape with pliers. His hand slipped. He cut his thumb. He wiped off the blood and kept working. The wire became an inline tensioner. It took 8 minutes to install. When he pulled the cable again, there was no slack. The control surface moved instantly. McKenna closed the panel, cleaned his tools, and walked away knowing he had violated multiple regulations and could face court-martial if discovered. But Hayes might live. At 7:42 the next morning, Hayes took off. At 8:14, his flight intercepted Japanese fighters over the Huon Gulf. Hayes dove on a Zero, fired, and missed. The Zero snap-rolled and dove. Hayes rolled to follow, and for the first time, the aircraft responded instantly. No delay, no hesitation. Hayes fired again. The Zero exploded. Seconds later, 3 more Zeros dove on him. Doctrine said run. Hayes reversed and fought. The P-38 snapped around faster than anything he had ever flown. 2 more Zeros fell. 3 kills in 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at 9:03, he walked straight to McKenna and said, "It worked." Other pilots had seen the fight. They noticed something different. McKenna modified more aircraft. Other mechanics copied him. No paperwork, no permission. By September, dozens of P-38s had the modification. Kill ratios shifted. Losses dropped. Pilots started coming back. Even Japanese pilots noticed. Their timing no longer worked. Their tactics failed. Confidence disappeared. Eventually, engineers discovered the modification. They tested it, confirmed it worked, and quietly added it to later P-38 models. McKenna received no credit. He went home, opened a garage, and told people he had been a mechanic. That 6-inch piece of piano wire may have saved nearly 100 lives. That is how innovation really happens in war. Not in manuals, not in committees, but in the hands of people who refuse to watch others die.